My grandson was sitting on the front steps of the church when I pulled up. 7 years old, backpack on his lap, holding his little sister's hand like he was the one in charge. She was 5. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. I didn't say a word. I got out of the car, walked up those steps, crouched down so I was eye level with both of them, and I said, "You hungry?" My grandson nodded. "Okay," I said. "Get in the car." I didn't ask where their mother was yet. I already knew something was wrong. A grandmother always knows. Her name is Claire, my daughter, 34 years old, bright as a sunrise, stubborn as her father. God rest his soul. She married into the Caldwell family 6 years ago. Married Thomas Caldwell, youngest son of Gerald Caldwell, founder of Caldwell & Sons Property Group, one of the largest real estate development firms in the Atlanta metro area. I had concerns from the beginning, not about Thomas. Thomas was a gentleman, a little lost, but decent at his core. My concerns were about his father. Gerald Caldwell was the kind of man who smiled with all his teeth and none of his eyes. The first time I met him, he looked at me the way people look at something they're deciding whether to keep or throw away. I was wearing a good dress. I had done my hair. I had brought a homemade pound cake because that is what you do when you meet your daughter's future family. He thanked me for the cake and set it on the kitchen counter without offering anyone a slice. That was all I needed to know about Gerald Caldwell. But Claire loved Thomas, and Thomas loved Claire. So I kept my thoughts to myself, the way mothers learn to do, and I watched, and I waited, and I prayed I was wrong. I was not wrong. Claire had worked at Caldwell & Sons for 4 years by the time everything fell apart. Gerald had brought her on as office manager, his idea, not Thomas's, and she was good at it, better than good. Within 18 months, she had restructured their client filing system, cut administrative overhead by nearly 20%, and caught 2 billing errors that would have cost the firm a combined $60,000. Gerald praised her in front of clients, told people she was practically family. That phrase should have been a warning. People who say practically family usually mean temporarily useful. What I am about to tell you, I learned in pieces. Some from Claire, some from what I uncovered myself, some from a quiet conversation with Thomas later when he finally understood what his father had done. Gerald had been skimming, not in an obvious way. Gerald was too smart for obvious. He had been rerouting small percentages of client escrow payments, nothing dramatic, 1 to 2% per transaction, into a separate LLC he had created 3 years prior under a different name. The LLC appeared on no official Caldwell documentation. Claire found it by accident. She was cross-referencing wire transfers for an end-of-quarter audit and noticed a routing number that didn't match any of the firm's registered accounts. She flagged it to Thomas. Thomas brought it to his father. What happened next is the part that still makes my blood run cold. Gerald did not explain. Gerald did not apologize. Gerald did not even pause. He told Thomas that Claire had made an error, that she had misread the documentation, that the LLC was a legitimate investment vehicle he had established years ago, and that Claire, with her limited understanding of high-level real estate finance, had misinterpreted what she was looking at. Then he went to the HR administrator, a woman named Donna who had worked for Gerald for 22 years and would have walked into traffic if he asked her to, and he had Claire terminated before the end of the business day. Wrongful termination, no severance, no written explanation. Just a box of her belongings and an escort to the parking lot. Thomas didn't stop it. That is the part Claire couldn't get past, and I understood why. Her husband stood in his father's office and did not say a single word in her defense. He had been Gerald Caldwell's son for 34 years. He had learned across those 34 years that silence was the safest response to his father's decisions. That knowledge had calcified into reflex. He didn't even know he was doing it. But Claire knew. She felt it like a door closing. She took the kids, Marcus and little Ava, and she went to the house. Their house. The one she and Thomas had been living in for 5 years, the one they had renovated together, the one where Ava had taken her first steps on the kitchen floor. Except the house was on a lot that Gerald owned outright. A detail that had been in the original paperwork, a detail that had felt meaningless at the time because Thomas had assured her his father would never. Gerald transferred the deed back to himself within 48 hours, had a locksmith change the codes the following morning. Claire came home from taking the children to school and found her key card wouldn't work. She called Thomas. He didn't answer. She called again. Voicemail. She sat in the driveway for 2 hours with nowhere to go because she was too ashamed to call me, her mother, and admit that her father-in-law had just dismantled her life in 72 hours. Eventually, she drove to the church where she had been baptized, where she had been married. She sat on those front steps with Marcus and Ava, and she waited for something to occur to her. That is where I found them. I want to tell you what I did in those first moments because I think it matters. I did not cry. I did not cry. I did not call Gerald Caldwell every name I had been storing up for 6 years. I did not call Thomas and let him hear exactly what I thought of his silence. I had learned something across 63 years of living that Claire had not yet learned, which is this: anger is energy, and energy spent screaming is energy not spent winning. I buckled both grandchildren into the back seat and I drove them to my house and I made them grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. I ran Ava a bath because her shoes had been on the wrong feet and I wanted to know how long they had been sitting outside. I read Marcus 2 chapters of the book he had been working through. I got them both into the guest beds. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee and I wrote down everything Claire told me that night. Every date, every name, every dollar amount she could remember, every conversation she had witnessed, every document she had touched. I had spent 31 years as a paralegal. Gerald Caldwell did not know that. People rarely ask what a woman my age used to do before she became somebody's grandmother. The routing number Claire had flagged was the thread I needed. She had written it down before she was escorted out, had tucked the paper into her jacket pocket out of habit, the way you hold on to evidence before you even know it's evidence. She handed it to me at the kitchen table with shaking hands, and I smoothed it flat on the legal pad and looked at it for a long time. I called a woman named Patricia Osei the next morning. Patricia had been a junior associate at the firm where I worked for the last 12 years of my career. She was now a partner. She specialized in financial fraud and civil litigation. I had helped her prep her first 3 trials. She owed me nothing, but she answered on the second ring. "Ruby," she said, "what do you need?" I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment. "Send me the routing number," she said. "Give me 48 hours. 48 hours later, Patricia called me back with a name. The LLC was registered to a man named Dale Whitmore. Patricia ran it further. Dale Whitmore was Gerald Caldwell's brother-in-law, his wife's younger brother, who had legally changed his name in 2019 following a prior fraud settlement in the state of Florida. The LLC had received 41 wire transfers over 30 months. Patricia's forensic accountant estimated the total at somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000, pending full documentation. Escrow fraud. Client funds. The kind of thing that does not just end a career. The kind of thing that ends a freedom. I want to tell you something about this moment. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad, and I thought about Thomas standing in that office saying nothing, and I thought about Claire sitting on those church steps, and I felt the weight of what it costs a family to let one person's greed rot the whole thing from the inside. That weight stayed with me through everything that came after. We did not rush. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Real Estate Commission. She simultaneously filed a civil suit on Claire's behalf for wrongful termination and a separate suit regarding the property. Because what Gerald had done with the deed transfer, Patricia explained, had procedural problems. He had used a provision in the original title agreement that had a very specific condition, a condition Gerald had not technically met at the time of the transfer. The house situation was recoverable. It would take time, but it was recoverable. The escrow fraud investigation, once it began, moved faster than Gerald anticipated because Gerald had made one significant mistake. He had always been the smartest man in every room he occupied, and that belief had made him careless. He had not fully scrubbed the internal transfer records before Claire was let go. He had assumed she didn't know what she'd found. He had assumed she would be too humiliated to do anything about it. He had forgotten that she had a mother. Thomas came to my house 6 weeks after I found the children on those church steps. He came alone. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping. He sat at my kitchen table where Claire had sat, in the same chair, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he said anything. He said, "I'm sorry." I poured him coffee. I sat across from him. He said, "I knew something was wrong with the accounts. I'd known for a while. He's my father." "I know," I said. "I didn't know he was going to do all of it," he said. "The termination, the house. I didn't know he would go that far." "But you knew he might," I said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I told him what Patricia had found. I told him what was coming. I watched his face move through about 15 different things and settle into something that looked like relief, which surprised me. But I have learned that people who have been waiting for the other shoe to drop sometimes feel something like relief when it finally does. At least the waiting is over. Thomas retained his own attorney the following week and cooperated fully with the investigation. That cooperation mattered. It mattered for the criminal case, and it mattered later when Claire had to decide what she wanted the rest of her life to look like. That is not my story to tell. What Claire decided about her marriage, what she and Thomas worked through or didn't work through, that belongs to them. What I will tell you is that she did not make that decision from a position of desperation. She made it with a roof over her head and her job back and her children in a stable school year. She made it as a woman who knew what she was worth because her mother had made sure she knew. Gerald Caldwell was formally charged 14 months after those children sat on those church steps. The charges included misappropriation of client escrow funds, wire fraud, and one count related to the deed transfer that Patricia argued constituted a fraudulent conveyance. His attorney negotiated because that is what attorneys do, and some charges were reduced. But Gerald Caldwell did not walk away clean. He lost his real estate license. He lost the majority of his firm's contracts when the civil settlement became public record. The Caldwell & Sons name, which he had spent 40 years building, became the kind of name that makes people in Atlanta real estate circles change the subject. I did not go to the hearing. I didn't need to. I was at home making grilled cheese sandwiches. Marcus had decided they needed to be cut diagonally, not straight across, and he was very serious about this requirement. Ava had appointed herself the soup stirrer and was taking the responsibility extremely seriously. Claire was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking out the window at the backyard where the forsythia was coming in yellow and bright along the fence. She said, "Mom, how did you know what to do?" I thought about it for a minute. I thought about 31 years of legal pads and routing numbers and quiet women in conference rooms who nobody looked at twice. I thought about Gerald setting that pound cake on the counter without offering anyone a slice. "I paid attention," I said. "I paid attention for a long time," she nodded. "Also," I said, "I knew Patricia." Claire laughed. It was the first real laugh I had heard from her in over a year. It moved through the kitchen like something being released. Marcus looked up from his sandwich. "What's funny, Grandma?" Claire said. He considered this and nodded like it made complete sense. "Grandma's always funny," he said, and went back to inspecting the diagonal cut. I want to say one more thing for anyone who is watching this and recognizes something in this story, not the specific details. The firm, the routing number, the deed, but the shape of it. The slow, quiet way a person can dismantle someone who loves them, the way institutions protect themselves, the way silence becomes a habit in people who have learned that speaking up costs too much. I am 63 years old. I have outlasted 3 employers, 1 husband I loved very much, 2 recessions, and Gerald Caldwell. What I know from all of that is that the people who count on you being too ashamed or too tired or too alone to fight back, they are almost always wrong about at least one of those things. You may be tired, you may be ashamed, but you are not alone. Pay attention, write things down, know who to call. And when your grandchildren are sitting on church steps with their shoes on the wrong feet, you get out of the car, you crouch down to their level, and you ask if they're hungry. The rest follows.